during that period, we had an undertaker. I can't honestly remember organising the funeral. I don't think. I can remember talking to her headmistress, and I remember talking to the vicar, and I remember them talking about the service, but I don't actually remember saying what I wanted. And that's not because I didn't say it, it's because I've chosen to forget what I've said. And then on the Friday night, which was June the 9th, Martin had been at home for several days. And on the 9th, we took Martin's body into church, into my church, and we had a small service. And the following morning, which was a Saturday, we had the funeral. All I can remember about that was kids' voices singing. I can remember a poem read by one of the kids, which was Footsteps in the Sand. And I can remember having Martin's photograph in my hands, and I don't remember anything else. But I mean, since then, I've heard that the church was absolutely crammed full, outside was crammed full. The cemetery where Martin was buried was full. I never went to the cemetery, and I've never been able to go to a burial since. I've been to cremations and I've been to services with burials, but I can't personally go to a gravesite. And then, you know, after the funeral, the days go on and the days roll into weeks. And the next thing I remember was some friends of David's, because we're from a community, which was a really tight-knit community. And I don't know if it's a Welsh thing or whether it's all communities do this, but people don't know what to do to help. I can remember people coming with boxes of tea bags and jar of coffee and milk and sugar and packs of biscuits, because they didn't know how to help, and they thought, well, you've got loads of visitors, let's help with that. But I remember the two guys, it was two friends of David came, and they had an envelope, and they said they didn't know what to do, so they'd had a whip round. And we didn't even count the money. We just said, no, that's fine, we don't need it. No, they insisted we take the money. So we took the money and we put it in a drawer. And about 2 or 3 days after that, we had the bill for the funeral. And I can remember the undertaker being really anxious giving me the bill, because obviously nobody wants to give a bill for a child's funeral. So we opened the bill, and I can remember I can remember the pain in my stomach. It was like ice water in my stomach. It was so, oh my God, you know, I think it was for £1,700, which at the time, you know, all those years ago, was a lot of money. And I kept thinking, how the hell am I going to get this money? And we went to the drawer, which where the money was in an envelope, and there was £1,000 in it. So which meant that we were £700 short, but I'd buried Martin with my gold crucifix, and David wanted to buy me one to replace it, which I've never worn, but it's in my purse. And David said, I'll go to the bank. So he went down to his bank, and I can remember being really nervous that he wasn't going to get this money, but the bank had said yes, so he gave us a bank loan, and he borrowed £750 and came home with the £700 and a crucifix for me. So we paid the bill, and that was it. Now, for about 2 years after that, I didn't really live, if I'm honest. I just existed. I was working with mentally handicapped. I went to work with mentally handicapped children as a dinner lady, probably in 1988. So I'd gone back to work, and I'd worked as a barmaid for a short space of time. So I can remember starting to think about going back to work about 18 months after I lost Martin. Because financially I needed to work, so we went back to work, and life plods on. And for a long time, couldn't even think about going to a funeral, anybody's funeral. I didn't want to hear about anything. I knew of other people who lost children for various reasons, but I could never go and pay my respects. I would write them a letter, but I could never pay my respects, and I could never go to a funeral because you just absorb it all as you don't. And I always remember, even now, I'll watch a film, I'll watch a sad film, and a mother will lose a child in the film, or somebody will die in the film, and you'll see people crying, and the tears are streaming down my face. And when I stop and analyse, why do I feel this bad, I realise I'm not crying because of what I've watched or what I've heard. I'm crying for myself. So I think you constantly grieve, and I feel I've grieved since I was 29 years of age. And I was never in a position to do anything about that, because I was a dinner lady and a barmaid. But in '94, I decided to go to university. So I went to university, and I started doing social history and social policy. And I stayed there until 98 because I'd gone to do, I was a mature student. There was a special course for a year for you to see if you were, to give you some kind of qualification to see what you wanted to do from there. So I did that for a year. Then I was accepted into full-time university. And I came out to there in 98. And I went to work straight away with disaffected young people. So young people in trouble, having problems. I mean, I worked with a lot of kids who had drug problems at 14 and 15. So I was beginning to spend a lot of time talking to kids who had not had the same opportunities as my child has had. And all that led me to go into full-time politics, something I'd always been interested in. And so I went into full-time politics in the sense that I worked for an MP for many years. And then when I got elected, I toyed with the idea of what I could do about this for about a year, and I had to really get myself into the place where I knew I could talk about this. And then the Mirror started running a campaign on children's funeral costs. And I don't know, I can't remember how they discovered I'd lost my son. So they came to me and said, look, are you prepared to talk about this? So I just started to talk about it with them. And before I know it, I'm standing up in the chamber with an adjournment debate, and I'm telling my story about Martin. And it had a massive impact. You know, the following day, I was on the sofa in Salford with BBC. I'd done Victoria Derbyshire. Newspapers wanted to know the story. It really did become a very emotive issue, but all of a sudden people were thinking, maybe this woman got a point here. So I started asking the British government back in November last year if they would set up a children's funeral fund, which would cover the cost of the local authority costs for children's funerals, which can vary from £400 to £4,000, depending on which part of the country you live in, which is ludicrous. And what I've said to the government repeatedly is, don't tell me about the social fund, because the social fund is only applicable to people who are on benefit. When you lose a child, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't say, well, we'll take this child because the parents are on benefit. Anyone can be affected, from someone who is a millionaire to someone who's got absolutely nothing. People who on paper may appear to have the money to bury a child, if that child has a long-term illness, they may well have spent most of their money on childcare and travel costs and whatever it is they need to provide for that, for siblings and for the child who's sick. So most people who are involved with long-term problems which lead to the bereavement won't have any money for a funeral. And what parent thinks, well, we'll put that away now to pay for my child's funeral? No parent ever thinks they're going to bury their child. It's not the way the thing should go. So I started to challenge the benefit system, and I'm still challenging it. I'm still saying to the government, you've got to stop expecting parents to pay for this. And I did have a meeting a couple of weeks ago where I spoke to the minister, who I think I convinced that that was the right thing to do, but what will happen on there at a national level, I don't know. But in the meantime, in March this year, both the Co-op and Dignity funeral companies, which are probably the two biggest in Great Britain, they said that they would not charge for children's funerals in terms of the coffin and the cars and making the arrangements at all up until 18. A lot of independent funeral directors will not charge. And then the Welsh Government, after a lot of local authorities started saying they were going to scrap the fees, the Welsh Government took on that responsibility and they scrapped fees for children's funeral in Wales. So in Wales, there is no charge for a child's funeral, whether it's a burial or a cremation, to use the chapel for a service, to reopen a grave, for a new grave, for a cremation, it's free. So in Wales, technically, if you use a funeral director who doesn't charge, the bureaucratic side of it is all covered. And my hope is that this year, I'd like to think it'll happen before we go into another year and any more parents need to find themselves in financial difficulty, that the British government will have done the same. And then I feel that my son Martin, and I call it Martin's legacy because that's what I feel it is, you know. I had to lose a child in order to do it. And since I first spoke out, and I've heard from so many different people. I've heard from a lot of people who've never lost a child but who sympathise with the situation that we're in and say, this is awful, what can we do to help? And I've heard from a lot of parents who've actually not been able to afford to pay for the child's funeral. I've had terrible stories from people who've lost babies at birth and they've not been able to take the child home or to bury it because they didn't have the money. So they've left the baby with the hospital to make arrangements for, and then they never know where that child is buried. I've had dads getting in touch with me who lost a child and had bailiffs chasing after him because he wasn't able to pay the funeral. Now, I understand that if you're a funeral director and you've got a service and you charge for the service, I do appreciate that funeral poverty is a terrible thing, and obviously it's the funeral directors that actually take the brunt of that in terms of not having money paid that's owed them. But you know, when you think about a bailiff knocking somebody's door because they're chasing them for the cost of the child's funeral, it's just heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And you know, there's so many things in 2017 I wouldn't want to see, but parents struggling to pay for a child's funeral or getting into debt to pay for it. We're a civilised society, you know. It's morally right, isn't it, to make sure that that is not an issue for anybody. So that's my story.